Hi guys, and welcome back to Topical and Queer. My name is Haz, they, he.
And I am Sav, she, her.
We're tired, it's late.
Yeah.
So, welcome back to Topical and Queer. This week's episode, do you want to introduce it?
This week's episode is: do issues of homophobia and race go hand in hand?
Sav.
Yay!
Woo! Sav, tell me, do issues of homophobia and race go hand in hand?
I think that to a certain extent, yes. Because as with everything, there's always a certain experience and then the POC version of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And they always do differ. So in that respect, yes, they do go hand in hand. But not in the way that people who aren't POCs expect, I guess.
Yeah.
Or not that they don't expect, but that they don't really think about. Which is okay. But yeah. Yeah.
So in short, yeah. I would say this is a very difficult question to begin navigating. But thanks for the question, folks. We should also say, just before we start properly, Daisy's off living her life again. So apologies for the lack of Daisy in this episode. It's a hard question to navigate. Obviously, it is Black History Month, so we should probably focus on... We can talk about other ethnicity groups, but we should probably focus on
Black people.
It's
Black People Month.
because it is Black People Month. So let's talk about the experience of, well, not just the experience of being black and queer, but experiences. So we should probably start talking maybe in more of a third person context. Definitely for me, as not a black person, in terms of a third person context, about things.
Yes. I think to kick it off, I think within black communities, especially historically speaking, a lot of these issues come from like Western ideals that were brought into these communities like around the times of colonization. Mm-hmm. So because like when you think about it, especially like let's take Africa for example, there was never like the idea of even the gender binary.
Nope.
So it's a thing of like, how do you get to a point where queerness becomes less accepted? I'm going to read this straight from the stonewall.org.uk website because I feel like it ties into what I just said. But basically, colonization and the spread of fundamentalist Christian attitudes from the British meant that much of Africa lost its previous cultural attitude towards sexual orientation and gender identity, were forced to accept new values from British colonizers in the 19th and 20th centuries. I feel like the attitude towards being queer would have been way more relaxed because it wasn't as black and white as there are men and there are women and men like men and women like women. So you could be more relaxed because the gender binary didn't exist.
I say none of these labels existed before white people colonized everywhere.
Yeah. And it says, in 1910, Christians made up about 9% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa. And by 2010, the figure had leapt to 63%. Anti-LGBT laws were not only written into constitutions, but also into the minds of many African people. And after the passing of several generations, it became the norm. And obviously, this is not just Africa. This is in many different
I was going to say, I think a lot of, specifically if we're talking about like the black queer experience in Britain, a lot of these ideals that I think is what we're discussing here, will be cultural things from other areas of the world.
Yeah.
For example, like if you are from Jamaica or anywhere in the not anywhere in the Caribbean, but lots of places in the Caribbean, or your family is from there, it is
Well, in a lot of
illegal
places it's
in those
outlawed,
countries to be gay.
and it is based off of like it's something that's been passed down from generations and generations and generations because of a religion that was, I'm gonna lightly say, forced upon people.
Yeah.
And just kind of leave it at that. But I just find it really interesting because if you are a Christian and Christianity has been part of your life because of your family and whatever, and you do feel really strongly against being queer, I do find that interesting because it could be seen as a product of colonization that happened all these years ago. And that's not to say that none of your opinions or your ideals are your own. At the end of the day, right, if you're against homosexuality, then
You're a homophobe.
yeah, aside from being a homophobe, whether
Yeah.
or not you're religious, because like whatever.
Yeah, I agree. This is such a tricky issue. I feel like, especially approaching it as a non-black person,
Yeah.
I feel in a difficult position here, but you've asked to hear it. We're talking about it. I would say another big thing is obviously lots of countries in Africa have huge crises when it comes to HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
And obviously HIV and AIDS as a disease, as a virus, is something that is highly attached to gay men in particular.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of countries as well also have laws that sort of outlaw what are deemed as homosexual acts between men, but don't actually rule it out for women. Because there is this, we want to distance ourselves from the queer community in any way possible because we don't want the only link to be this disease.
Yeah. I think this is slightly steering away from your point. So
Go
maybe
for it.
you
It's fine.
Okay. I'm going to say the bottom line is black queer people, I feel like, are often in a position where I can only speak for myself, to be honest, but I feel like a lot of black queer people are often put in a position where you either identify more with your blackness or you identify more with your queerness. And I do think that the main problem with homophobia within the community does stem from church and a huge like religious impact upon the black community and the teachings that come with that, because there's already an issue with certain religious teachings surrounding homosexuality, and we can sit here and talk about the same topic till,
Sorry.
the cows come home. We can talk about, the way people choose to treat gay people versus what the Bible says about loving
I
your
was to
neighbour.
say, can we also just place emphasis on this is not us coming for any religions at
Not
all.
at all. Not
Religion
at
is lovely, it's beautiful, it gives people lots of things. It's the
Yes.
way certain people choose to interpret religion
all. That becomes the problem.
that becomes the problem.
Absolutely nothing against anybody who has any sort of religion. That's not what we're about at all. But the way some people, for years, the way people have chosen to some people have chosen to interpret religion has been extremely harmful. And I do think it has gotten to a point where it's become generational.
Yeah.
Like, it's become generations of harming certain people because of their sexuality versus a religion that they've been brought up in. And actually, I read this on an article, I think the website's called Frontiers,
Oh, yeah.
but it says that
Sav's been doing her research again,
she has been
folks.
doing research. The prevalence of homophobia and homophobic abuse in Jamaica and other Caribbean islands has been linked to high rates of family disownment, homelessness, and loneliness within local LGBT communities. And homophobia has also contributed to some mental health issues experiences by LGBT individuals in the region, including their greater rates of depression, anxiety, and substance misuse disorders compared to heterosexuals. And I just, like, all of that goes without saying. It's interesting to me how the way people choose to interpret religion has caused such a generational, like, I guess discourse is the right word, because obviously as you get younger, the idea is that the next generation is more accepting than the last, or the next generation does more than the last. But I do find that, I don't want to say people are turning away from religion, but it is very hard as a queer black person, and this is coming from a queer black person who was, you know, who has been raised in a slightly religious household. It is hard to be a queer person anyway and stay with the religion that is interpreted in a way that demonizes you. And I do find that to be more present in black communities, but at some points it can be more emphasized, and I can't help but wonder why.
I was going to say, I think we are safe to say, actually, that it is more present, because there is research that does correlate.
I think this is what happens also when communities have religion brought up upon them based on fear, because obviously people colonized and brought the religion over, so the religion was brought onto people by fear. And that's not to say if you're like a black Christian nowadays that you're a black Christian because you're scared. You can be any religion for whatever reason you want to be. You know, it brings people comfort, all of that. But I'm talking about like the way it started and how that then manifests itself nowadays. I just find it really interesting. It's very sad.
I think that really is interesting. It's very sad. I think that is possibly the root of the problem when it comes to a lot of black communities' views on homosexuality or general queerness or LGBTQ plus identities. I think it does stem from religion, and like you say, if you choose to be religious for whatever reason, I think you're always going to be more open to things than if you do have a religion forced upon
100%.
you.
Yeah.
Especially if it is a generational thing, and it is in your life from the start in a certain way with certain teachings that have been passed down for over 400 years.
Yeah.
Like it. Yeah, and obviously when we're talking about I think we are mostly talking about Christianity.
Yeah.
That was that was forced
because it is
onto
like
people
it is like
during
one of the
colonization.
Newest, it is one of the newest.
Yeah.
People before pre-colonization, people still had their own beliefs.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm not saying that those have been lost, but looking back generationally, people are Christian now because of colonization.
Yeah. And I think that I think what we're getting at is the way that Christianity was. I don't want to use the word preached, but I suppose it's the correct term.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way Christianity was preached to black communities during colonization was in order to instill fear.
Yeah.
I think.
Or fear or power.
Or power, yeah.
And like the view, I feel like the view on sexuality and your orientation and your identity is a way to hold power over someone, and deciding we said it last time, going over to somewhere that doesn't have a gender binary and enforcing all these like Western or British or whatever views on people,
Which don't work.
which don't work, and then also being like, by the way, you can only love someone from the opposite of what we're telling you that you are. It's very confusing. It's very scary given the power that the colonizers had over people.
Yeah.
And I feel I don't want to use the word fascinate because I don't want it to be seen as positive, but it does fascinate me how fear does carry on over generations and how it manifests into other things and how it gets to a point where people are just like, don't be gay because that's what it says in the Bible, or that's what it says in our religion. And
it is generational religious trauma.
And it is generational religious trauma, but it's something that when you do break it down, you do understand. But luckily for us, well, lol, I was about to be like, luckily for us, we're not slaves anymore. But however, obviously there are still issues, but I do feel like we can get to a point now where we can actually think for a bit and be like, oh, okay, well, just because I'm not saying if you're a Christian, stop it, because that's not again that's not what I'm about. But I do think in whatever faith you are, I encourage people not to cherry pick certain parts of your own faith
and not to decide
what people
for other
are.
people.
For other people, what they are.
What they can and can't do.
Let's not, it's 2022. Let's try and not do what the colonizers did. If the Bible does say, love thy neighbour, so give that a try.
This is something that the Bible talks about love double the amount of times that it talks about hate. Mm-hmm. The word love is mentioned in the Bible. What is it?
We're going off the show Tammy Faye. It's very good. Watch it.
If you haven't seen Tammy Faye, go see Tammy Faye.
You won't be able to now, but still.
Oh, you won't be able to. It's sold out.
In the New Revised Standard, the word love is mentioned 538 times, and in the New Living Translation, the word love is mentioned 898 times.
898 times. And hate.
The word hate is mentioned 86 times in the King James Version.
That's correct. I remember that number. 86 times. So, I mean...
But even then, it wouldn't have just been hate. It would have been,
for a purpose.
Yeah. Whereas
this
love,
is the thing.
It's like,
if we're going for Christianity, Jesus always preached about love. If we're thinking of... Islam literally means peace.
Yeah.
Like, religion is at its core, I think, love.
Yeah.
Not hatred, not bigotry, not something to impose on people for power, which unfortunately it has been used for in the past. And I think that is probably what our conversation today stems from.
And I do just want to reiterate that if you are a Black Christian, I'm not sitting here, being like...
Not at all.
I'm not sitting there being like, you're only a Christian because the colonizers wanted you that. Stop it. Blah, blah. You can do whatever you want, but I think it's worth having a conversation with older generations about homophobia and where it stems from, because I do think... I do still see homophobia within certain, not all, obviously, certain like Black Christians my age. Even then, it tends to be less aggressive, but it's still there. But I do think it's worth having that conversation with older generations just to see where that's coming from. And I do also think it's worth having that conversation with yourself, because especially as a person of colour, we got enough to deal with. Do you know what I mean? Like we get so much from other people, not just from white people. We get so much from everyone else right? And I really don't think that we ourselves need to be alienating people who are going to go through it tougher just because they are black. And that's just the way things work. I feel like it can be very scary to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
And figuring out who you are whilst being, on top of that, whilst being black and kind of navigating that through today's society. Especially as a whole, people seem to be taking whole steps backwards way more than steps forwards. I think that we can all be kinder.
So yeah, I agree. Speak to older generations. What I was going to say is if you want sources on this, if you want anything to watch, anything to listen to, anything to read, to learn about the black queer experience or learn about where these issues of homophobia stem from, when it comes to black communities, I would suggest first of all, just listening to Billy Porter.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't know who Billy Porter is, first of all, why? Second of all, Google them.
Yeah.
But Billy Porter is incredible. Just listen to Billy Porter speaking, specifically during 2020, 2021, sort of during the lockdown when Black Lives Matter was at its
it was at the forefront of all media.
Forefront of all media, yeah. Billy Porter has some really, really good messages to the world. I think those messages are still on their Instagram. They're really interesting, and they talk a lot about just in Billy Porter's words, the black community having to do better. That was a quote. That's not me saying that.
It is me saying it
before
though.
You come for me.
It is me saying it though. They need to do better.
In terms of accepting queer black people, because it is everyone's fight at the end of the day. And queer black people are the most oppressed, I would say, especially
because you got it from all ends.
Black trans women, as we
Literally
spoke about last
from
week.
all ends. Why are we still fighting among each other and alienating each other? We more than anything, or like we need to be uplifting each other. I know we keep saying that, but it's because it's ridiculous the way we can alienate each other, especially over something that was literally forced upon our own community. If I'm being honest, like. Sometimes I'm like, is this what they wanted? And I'm just going to throw that one out there.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think it is. But yes, that. But also, if you want to know a bit more about where it stems, I would recommend finding A-Lock on Instagram as well. He's a really, really cool non-binary influencer activist. And they talk a lot about sort of the root of queerphobia and how it is sort of based in colonialism. But also, I would say a really good documentary which mentioned it more towards the end was Tom Daly's Illegal to Be Me. It's on BBC. I think you find it on iPlayer. And that talks a lot about sort of the way homophobia and sort of laws. I mean, in the documentary, he talks a lot. Obviously, he's a openly gay athlete, and it was during the Commonwealth Games. There were a lot of countries competing in the Commonwealth, a lot of countries who compete in the Olympics as well, where it is illegal to be yourself if you are a queer person. But at the end of the documentary, he goes and he's with a historian, and they look into where homophobia is rooted, and a lot of it in many, many countries, specifically countries where the majority of people are black, it does stem from colonialism.
Yeah.
So
Surprise.
really interesting watch. So that's my input for the day.
Just on that, I don't know if you guys remember, but there used to be this trend on TikTok that I kind of found a bit corny. People might not like this, but I think I'm just going to say it anyway. Where queer people, I do have to say, that I did see it a lot, and all the ones I saw were queer white people. So I'll leave that there. But they do this thing where they get on. Do you remember? Is that kids' cartoons where they listed all the countries of the world, and it was like United States, Canada, what was there with them again?
Cannot remember.
Yeah, right. But they'd sit there and they'd be like, all the countries that I, as a gay, can't go to. And they'd sit there and they'd like tick off whenever like a country, and they'd be like, look at like all these countries that I'm like so illegal in. And I just found it really corny because, first of all, if you're white and you're saying this, you need to really think about why that is, because it's your ancestors' fault.
Oh my god. I mean, you're not wrong. What I will say, not to silence you over here, Sav, but what I will say is that, oh dear. What I will say is, whilst you're correct, I think the main takeaway from today is let's not blame people now for homophobia.
Okay, let me reword it.
Carry on with your point.
Let me reword it.
This ain't getting cut.
let me reword it. Okay. You have to be you have to really think about it, and I'd recommend doing your research into why that is, because a lot of it stems from the conversation that we've just had about colonialism, right? Furthermore, a lot of the countries they're listing have like humanitarian crises. Yeah. I don't think you going there and being gay.
I was going to say, they're probably not countries you'd want to go to anyway.
They're not even places that you're gonna go to, some of them. Yeah. And you're like, I just couldn't go there because I'm gay. And I'm just like, yeah, but why is that?
Don't get me wrong, it is scary for, I think, obviously both of us.
And it's not your fault, but it's your great
granddad's fault.
So have a word with him.
Have a word with him.
That's so peak. Are we keeping that?
Yeah, we're keeping that.
That's so funny. I mean, it's true. It's true. It's your ancestors' fault. They did it to you.
Yeah.
So just really think about that. Just think about that. Because I do find it a bit corny. I do find it corny.
Yeah.
There's a bigger issue at hand.
Obviously, that is not the problem.
No, it's not the problem.
That is not a solution to the problem. There is still a problem with the fact that there are countries in the world where...
Of course that's a problem.
It is legal. Of course
and again, it's colonisation, and it's, unfortunately, religion being enforced upon people, and the fact that some of the laws from colonisation have been carried over generationally, and I feel like those viewpoints have been ingrained into society, and unfortunately how people view the world, and that's just what happened, unfortunately.
I was going to say, and I think it's also just going to throw it out there to white people, especially leaders of any sort. Talking about like world leaders, I don't mean like if you own a company or like
or like white CEOs out there.
White CEOs out there. No, it's not your position to go to these countries and be like, no, you need to change your views now.
Don't,
because
don't
whose fault was it that those views were there in the first place?
You don't need to
and they're so ingrained out of sheer fear.
Yeah, it's your fault.
So it is, as if you listen to Billy Porter will say, I don't want to say it's your problem, because that sounds really bad. But it is. It's for the communities that have problems with homosexuality rooted in them to sort out now.
Bottom line is, us POCs, we don't need white people coming over and telling us, hey, your problems are because of what we did, sort them out. We don't need that, so please never. I feel like, but I'm only going to speak to black people because I am a black people, right?
You are multiple people.
I am a black people, right? The conversation needs to be had, and generational curses can be stopped.
I was just going to add, when we are talking about this, this does not, obviously this is an issue within black communities, but
Yeah.
it does not only affect black communities,
Not at all.
it affects the entire queer community, no matter
Yeah.
what your ethnicity, your skin colour, your race, your religion, your anything, your gender. It's an issue that does affect everyone at the end of the day, including the people who are being homophobic. I would like to say as well, throw in there something that ALOC always says. They always say that it is so easy to go online. They get a lot of harassment online. It's so easy to go online and call the person harassing them a bigot, but actually we're all in the same struggle. We're all part of the same. We're all part of the same struggle, and just because they can have love for themselves, that's what they're afraid of. That's what so-called bigots, homophobes, transphobes, whatever. That is what they're afraid of. They're afraid that they cannot love themselves in the way that we as queer people have grown to love ourselves, because it's such a scary thing to do, I suppose. It's such a bold thing to do.
And throughout the years, it's been so traumatic when we had, again, the whole, homophobia thing that's been there since the beginning of time. Not since the beginning of time, since colonisation. And, the AIDS crisis and, having to fight for gay marriage and all of this.
Still having to fight for
Still
gay
marriage.
to fight to not get the death sentence for holding your partner's hand.
Yeah, it's been so traumatic that you do have to have thick skin to be queer and be out.
Yeah.
And a lot of people... do you find it such a weird... This is so off topic, but not really. The weird homophobic secondary school bully to queer person pipeline.
Oh yeah, I know one of those.
And it's literally masking. You have to
internalized homophobia.
Yeah, and
externalized via the visibly queer kids.
Yeah,
myself included in that.
And I'm not saying I feel so bad for those secondary school bullies, because I don't.
I do actually. I
don't feel that bad for them.
Sympathise with them a lot, because they were clearly very, very, very insecure and had to make other people feel as insecure. So I do sympathise with them. I know you may struggle to agree with that.
I don't because...
I'm just a sympathetic person.
I don't because not everybody did that. Sorry.
No.
Anyway.
That's true.
But
I think I would say... I would say from my point of view, it would...
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on in people's lives. That person could have grown up in a very religious household, for example, where... being queer was frowned upon.
True.
So, that got us nicely back on topic, didn't it?
But then again, so could the people who've been bullied.
Exactly. So,
but I find that pipeline so weird, because again, it's like having a queer person who's like, the only way I can fit in is to show people that I'm normal. And the way I will do that is by excluding people like me, who I know are not quote-unquote normal, which we obviously know is not true. But it's almost like survival.
It is.
And the fact that in this day and age, people still feel the need to do that means you've got ages and ages to go.
Yeah.
So to answer the
question...
yes.
Issues of homophobia and race...
do go hand in hand. But it's white people's fault.
It's always white people's fault. I mean, come on. Oh, I should just throw it out there. Next week's episode is going to be very cool.
Yeah.
Going to feature some very cool people. And it's the last episode of Topical and Queer. We're going to be saying bye to Sav.
Bye, guys.
But not for long. Because
you can follow Topical Juice. I talk about currently October, so very black-centric issues, but then when October's done, more just POC-centric topics, issues, debates, etc., etc. They're not all negative. Some of them are quite fun. Have a listen.
I was going to say we might just get her back on the podcast, but yeah, follow hers as well. Yes, follow Topical Juice. We'll be back to Here and Queer very soon. Hopefully, Daisy will be joining us again next week. Daisy, if you're out there, if anyone sees Daisy, can you direct her towards me?
You can like bait her over with a can of Coke.
Next week's topic is very, very interesting. So keep your ears. I was about to say keep an eye out. Keep your ears open. Thank you for the question, whoever sent the question in. It was very, very interesting. And we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.